On today's episode of Water Cooler Weekly, we are joined by emerging journalist Shazma Gaffoor. Shazma touches on her career journey and the importance of the work she does, which is largely based around community and also towards creating a pathway for others. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Shaz and how she approaches her career, and I truly hope that you can take as much out of this as I did. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe on whichever platform you are listening to this episode on. And most importantly, please enjoy the episode. It is my pleasure now to welcome on emerging journalist Shazma Gaffoor. Shaz, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome, Chris. It's great to be here and to see you after so long.
I know it has been we'll touch on how we met. I'm still, as I just said to you before, I'm very surprised that when I reached out to you, you were like, yes, I remember you. And it was some kind of a pleasant meeting, because I was a bit unprofessional in the early work days. But before we get into that, let's find out what life has been like for you in lockdown. I'm guessing a little bit differently to my life.
I don't know if it's a little bit different, but look, it's interesting that you mentioned, because early in the year I visited my sister in Hong Kong, closest to China. And in February, when things started emerging, and when I returned back to Melbourne, it was right at the start of the pandemic, and I didn't think anything of it until the numbers started escalating. So that's obviously when things changed. See, I lived in Hong Kong, as I'll just very quickly touch on that. I grew up in Hong Kong, and we had the SARS in 2013. So I remember masks, I remember, sanitizer, and that was very much the norm. We didn't go into lockdown, but we had everything else, social distancing to some degree. Keep in mind, this is Hong Kong, where you're literally shoulder to shoulder, or nose to armpit in my case, because I'm short. So it's, it's all about that. And so when we went into lockdown, it wasn't a massive difference to me. At the same time, I was pleasantly surprised at, changing the way we do things. I was still employed. And as a uni student, I was still able to complete my, my classes and all my assignments. The detriment is because I'm a mum of 2 kids who are younger than 6. That was a challenging part. But again, working around it between me and my partner. And I also knew there were avenues if I couldn't proceed that I could forego this semester. I could have, taken it next semester, taken a lot more time at work, because they were quite generous with asking, particularly parents, to take time off. So all in all, yes, we have the lockdown, lots of Netflix. Yes, a lot of Netflix actually. And yes, and it was mainly the homeschooling that was the biggest challenge for us.
Yeah.
We've gotten over that. So now that school started, I just relish the time away and time for myself.
It's funny, I was talking to a friend of mine who has a young child, and she said to me that when daycare went back and she took him to daycare, she came home and she just cried. And I was like, oh, because you're used to having him there. She's like, no, because he was there. She's like, I love him, but I really needed a moment here.
Totally understand that. Totally. It's that sigh of relief, because you're constantly around and you constantly are not yourself. When they're daycare, you get to do other stuff. Yeah. So I was pretty much, I didn't cry, but I had a massive smile. I went for a coffee. I literally just sat and had my coffee on day one.
You didn't have 2 shadows with you for a change.
Yes, exactly right, which is massive. So that was very pleasant.
Yeah. So to summarize, very different to mine, to my experience during this, outside of Netflix, which has pretty much just been my existence and
Yeah,
a lot of just making my way from the bed to the couch and then
pretty
back to the
much.
bed. Yeah. Just two completely different experiences. But yeah,
Yeah,
it is great to one hear that you were able to juggle everything, and two that the kids are now back at school, and you can put more time into work, uni, which we will touch on.
yes.
We will get into shortly, but first off, we will talk about sort of your background and how we met. We we worked together briefly when I started my assault on the energy industry.
Yeah.
I worked at Origin. The fact that you're laughing, like it's I can't remember the way you described me, but when I can't remember the way you described me when I said, did you remember how I was?
And my answer to that was you were the life of the party, which we needed a bit of in an
Yeah,
environment that was, very, very intense at the
very
start.
dull.
Well, both. Well, intense for me because I think you guys were the first group that I co-trained with
Hmm.
someone else, and we were the Origin representative. The trainer was, I think, from an external organisation that they brought in to train. So obviously they needed SMEs, to help, which is subject matter experts. So I think the time I really got to know you is once you guys would train and on the floor speaking to customers. I literally had to run from one person to the other, helping out with an
Yeah.
inquiry. So I had like 2, 3 hands going up at the same time. All I remember was having a workout in high heels on day one. Like I said, because I'm short,
Yeah.
and I started wearing runners for, which I hadn't worn since high school. And it gave me a workout, but that's what I mean. Whilst you guys were headset on your seat, I was literally running around between consultants trying to help out, take escalated calls. So,
Yeah.
yes, it was a hyper intense time when it's got to know you.
A chaotic time, and I think I can safely say it now, but I'm not one of those people that puts my hand up. I believe that if you say something with confidence, whether it's right or not, it's like
It
you're golden.
stays.
So I constantly said things, and I was like, and like people sitting next to me, they're like, "Is that true?" And I was like, "Is now." I'm
Oh,
just
goodness.
I'm rewriting how the electricity industry works. So no, I'm glad
Hmm.
that I left a somewhat of a positive enough mark that
Yeah.
that you're open to doing this today. So that's
A good
great.
thing. That's right. That's right. And I don't remember any negativity during that time, even though you might have said something you're not supposed to, because usually they come back up and the other person answers those calls. But I don't remember anything
Yeah,
like that.
I think I
So
probably
it's
said a
all
lot of
good,
things.
Chris.
That's what I would tell my bosses. It's all good. What are we
See,
stressing about? That's
exactly
fine.
right. Exactly right.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So you just touched on that you grew up in Hong Kong. I don't know if you wanted to give us a rundown on your background
Yeah.
and sort of how you find yourself here.
The hardest thing for me to answer is when someone asks me, where are you from? It's
Mhm.
really, really difficult because I was born somewhere else. I grew up somewhere else. So I was actually born in Sri Lanka. So
Mhm.
I was Sri Lankan. Moved to Hong Kong when I was really young, grew up there, moved around Asia because my dad's business was thriving at that time. Then it plummeted, then thrived, kind of like, I like to romanticize it saying that it's like him being an artist. We did really well and really poor. But in all of that, I gained a lot of experience. I got to know a lot of people in different schools. I went to 3 high schools, 2 middle schools, so you should see our reunions. It's massive. I have one very often. Then I moved to Melbourne. Um, Gosh, I'm gonna give my age now, but a while back. That's
We can edit out the age. Don't worry.
what
I'll
was
look
that?
after you. Well, I'll edit out the age. I'll look after you. Don't worry.
No. So I moved to Melbourne about, let's say, roughly 15 years ago, and I moved and straight away started working.
Mhm.
But sort of going back to when I graduated in Manila, because we moved to Manila from Hong Kong during that time. And it was during my last year, which is the worst time to move, because I had to bid farewell to my high school mates and then get to know a whole heap of people for 1 year before they went off to uni. Um, it's safe to say that during that time, with all the differences and all the experiences, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So it just so happened that I was working part-time at a restaurant at TGI Fridays in Manila, and someone literally looked up and said, "I like your voice." So I said, "Oh, okay, thank you,
Kind of
very
creepy,
nice."
but thank you.
Exactly. She still have to pay your bill.
Yeah.
And then she gives me her card going, "I work for a radio station, and we'd like you to come, try out." And I was like, "Oh wow, 18-year-old, I would do it for free."
Mhm.
And she's like, "Don't worry, we'll pay you." And I was like, "Sure." And that's how I kind of had that stint at the radio station, which kind of put me on that, trajectory towards getting into radio, media, communications, and that.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's sort of a complete, I'm not going to say a fluke chance, but
Yeah.
a sort of a, you're almost minding your own business, working at a restaurant and someone's like,
Mhm.
hey, I like your voice,
Yep.
which is a weird thing to say to someone. And that sort of opened a massive door for you.
Yes.
That's
It did,
crazy.
particularly in a country that you're not, a local in as well. So I think what drew that particular radio station was people who are different, who sound different, which is interesting because I went to an American school and I sounded very American,
Yeah.
until obviously I've come down here. So you'll hear a bit of, twang here and there. But yeah, it was a great experience. It was a great experience.
Yeah, that's incredible. So let's skip forward to from that moment. So you've come to Melbourne
Mhm.
and you've started your working career. At what point did you sort of think, I want to go back, and because I know you said you wanted to further your education. A lot of people I feel want to do this,
Mhm.
but being a a parent, uh, and having a full-time job, it's a little bit more of a difficult, sorry, situation
Mhm.
or to put yourself in. At what point did you finally go, I'm going to do it?
It's interesting because I wanted to do something for myself. And like I said, when I was 18, I was discovered. It was almost like I went with the flow. Worked at the radio station in Manila, then moved back to Hong Kong, got a stint teaching English as a second language to local Chinese students for about 3 years intermittently, then moved to Melbourne and, took the first job that kind of came my way, which is in the energy industry that we both met. Um, and I worked continually until my husband at the time finished his degree. And once he finished, kids came. And it was one of those times I've always wanted to do something and I've always been community driven. And it was one of those things where I didn't know a label of what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something to give back
Mhm.
because I think I generally am quite sociable. I like networking with people. So if I can, utilize what my strengths into the best of my ability and give back to society, that's what I wanted to do. And it just so happened again, I watched a television show and I saw, because I wear a scarf, I'm Muslim, and I saw her, it was an American TV and she was a commentator and as a TV presenter. And it kind of gave me this whole sense of, powerfulness of you. It's a rare side, but it was a side that essentially enabled me to want to look into
Mhm.
going towards that direction. And having chats with my husband, going to uni open days, it was almost like a sign because a coordinator for media and communications at the uni that I go to was also a Muslim lady with a scarf. So it was like, it's a sign. And that was literally it. And because it's something that I enjoy trying to convey, stories out there to be a representative of myself and my faith. It just worked really well. So
Yeah,
now I'm doing a major in journalism.
that's incredible. I know I just mentioned before that I at one point wanted to do journalism because I do find it incredibly interesting that which is a large part of why I'm doing this is because I think there are so many incredible stories out there that so many people just never hear enough of. And there's completely different ways to go about it. I obviously never made it in journalism because I hated my own writing and I didn't like to proofread.
Don't we all?
So yeah, and I butchered the English language, which we've discovered. So it's a really fascinating for me, to see someone be exposed to this at an early age and then sort of drift away from it, but then always kind of have it in the back of your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then literally just go, all right, I'm in, and here we are.
That's it. And I couldn't take another chance because it's exactly like you said, with kids and with a family, it's not that mindset of I'm just going to try this and change my mind, which I can, but I wanted to go, and I've always been a person, if I commit to something, I need to give it my all, my 100%.
Mhm.
So there's nothing better to align it with than what you're passionate about. And there'll always be things that are challenging, which is, for me, it was some of the assignments or just finding the right time to do it and things like that. So you find a way. And like I said, if it is your passion, you find time, you organize yourself around it, and things will not go your way. There will be tears sometimes, but it's the attitude thereafter of what you want to do. Do you want to crash then, or do you want to go to the next step? And my goal is always, to convey the message to speak for those who are muted, because everyone's got a voice, and that's pretty much my mindset has always been towards. And just like you said, exactly what you're doing as well, there's a lot of voices out there that have been muted. There's a lot of stories that have not been told simply because they don't have a platform. And
Mhm.
we can speak all we want, but we don't get the minorities out there, we don't get those marginalized. And then the next question should be, okay, what can I do? Why don't I make the effort to get there, to get to that platform, so I can be that representative, rather
Yeah.
than question it and obviously talk about it all the time. It's hard, it's challenging, because as you can see, our media is not diverse, sadly. They speak of diversity, but it's not well represented. And that's
Mhm.
hopefully something that I'm looking to change if I can, even in a little way.
Yeah, no, that's I absolutely love hearing that. Like it's incredible to see, you can literally hear it in your voice that just how passionate you are about it. And obviously, we've had two completely different upbringings, of course. And yeah, I just think it's really cool that you are wanting to do this for the exact right reasons, and it's not self-serving. It's you're like, okay, I'm a social person. I like to talk. I like to do X, Y, and Z. Other people might not necessarily be as open to talking. They might not have the confidence, and you're like, I'll do that for you, and
Absolutely.
I'll promote your story, which people need to hear about.
I mean, the hope is that. The hope is absolutely that. You want to make sure that you convey that in the exact voice that it needs to be. And the fear is that you may not, because that's a massive responsibility as well. So you're given the platform, how do you utilize it, to the best of your ability? And
Mhm.
that's exactly what I suppose I wanted, a formal training, which is essentially, being at the university and sort of finishing my degree. Um, and there's so many avenues with that. There's broadcast, there's writing, and I mean, at this point, with this year being so crazy, you kind of turn it around and utilize it in the best way that you can. And also, I think we touched on earlier where we're sort of honing in on the lockdown, but there's so many things outside of the lockdown that's also happened where, you know, we should have given, you know, um, we should have given a platform for things, you know, people are still suffering, people are marginalized, people who don't have, you know, the comfort of a roof, you know, during the lockdown and things like that, because it was all about, you know, lockdown or anti-lockdown, and which, you know, we are, you know, a country where we're democratic, we talk, we have a voice, but at the same time, sometimes it overpowers those that need to actually be heard as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's exactly what I was touching on before, where, you know, I was like, which is, you know, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to pick your brain on the journalism stuff is that, you know, around approaching stories, is that people literally just seem to be zeroed in on like a handful of things right now, and it's just like, even if you just turn your head slightly, there are so many different stories and different ways you could approach it. And um, yeah, I'm really looking forward to, you know, to hearing about the work that you've done and how you approach it. But before we do that, you did mention that, you know, you've always been community driven, and you mentioned to me before that, you know, you do a lot of emceeing for like women's empowerment groups and, you know, other sort of groups. Did you want to get into that and sort of
Yeah,
what sort of put you into towards getting involved into that?
sure. Pretty much, you know, just sort of similarly, just to be the voice and have the platform to echo the voices of those marginalized. Um, I started off when I mean, the funny thing is, Chris, it wasn't even the intent. It was just, let me help an organization. What can I do?
Mhm.
And somehow people kind of placed me in the emceeing role because, you know, I like to talk, as you can see.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so I started being the unofficial, official, you know, MC for the community organization that I belong to, which is a Sri Lankan Muslim Association.
Mhm.
So a lot of their events, they have about 3 or 4 annually. I usually MC the women's side of things as like a ladies' night, and, you know, night just sort of celebrating women and things like that. Apart from that, through that, again, networking, I had the opportunity of also emceeing for different organizations centered around women. One in particular, which was massive, was last year. So as a Muslim, we have Ramadan, which is a month of fasting, and we conclude that with a massive feast. During that time, there are social events as well, where a lot of you know, non-Muslims are invited just to partake in, you know, what we do during our fasting or how we break fast, and just introducing a multitude of cultures to them as well.
Mhm.
During one of them, a lovely friend of mine who is a social activist. She owns a social enterprise called the Moroccan Super, and she hosted a iftar or break fast, which is at the end of we don't eat from dawn until dusk, and then we start eating and drinking. So she had personalities such as Gabrielle Williams, which was the Labour minister. Then she had Marine Faruqi, who's a Greens MP, and we also had Lydia Thorpe at that time, who was not really a Labour or a Greens minister, and months ago, she became the first Victorian Aboriginal senator.
Mhm.
I mean, the first ever.
Yeah.
And it's a great title to have, but at the same time, it's like, why are we honing it? It should just be a norm. It should be
Yeah,
our first
exactly.
minister who happens to be, as opposed to, oh, our first Victorian. It's actually quite a sad rhetoric. But anyways, that was it. That was one of the biggest sort of events that I had to MC, and I was petrified because these were massive personalities and they have massive platforms. And here I am introducing these personalities to talk. And, you know, it was such an honor to be part of that, really. And also to see what they've done with their platform, to see what they do for, you know, the wider Aboriginal community or the wider Muslim community or just the wider Australian community as a whole. So that's for me what was the most rewarding, just learning, taking stuff out of them, and also being given this platform to be able to stand up and represent, you know, people of my kind. So that was the biggest part for me in terms of emceeing. um, Apart from that, I mean, I've done little stints for university and, you know, news reading and things like that. Given the choice, I'd like to segue towards broadcast.
Mhm.
There is a massive limitation of people who are minorities. So that would be great if I had the opportunity. But at this point, really anything that I can get myself into, whether it's broadcast or whether it's writing for newspapers,
Yeah.
that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and you sort of just touched on it there that you were sort of that just because of the people who were involved with it, you were kind of like nervous. Like I can't really imagine I'm not a good public speaker, like
Yeah.
which seems hard to believe because I never stopped talking. But in terms of like in front of an audience, like I mean, how do you prepare for that? Like I understand that you said that it's a massive platform and an opportunity for you, but I
Yeah.
feel like I feel like it's all kind of in your head. Like people are not there to be like, oh my God, she said that word or she said this word. Everyone is
Yeah,
sort of so intently listening to you, but sort of in a supportive way.
that's right. I think, look, that's the underlay to it. It definitely is. People are there to support each other, and that's why we had it. And people of all walks, whether they were Muslim, whether they weren't, just people supportive of women in Australia, Australian women, coming together for a great cause. And but it still kind of takes it away from, you're still a person, and that's the thing that we sometimes we forget. It's like, great, I'm the MC, but I'm also that person, and it's my first in on such a massive, platform, or within, within a space where there's all these massive personalities. What I tried to do is I actually invited a close friend of mine, and I kept on sort of trying to hold my attention on her. It
Mhm.
just kind of made it that much easier, so I didn't have to look at all the other massive people over there.
Yeah,
But it also goes back to, why am I there? What am I there
yeah,
to do? What am I trying to convey? And it was basically to honor these women, and it was an honor in and of itself to be on that platform. So it was just basically to honor and reveal all the work that they've done, because we all we see is what is on the front. We don't see the tears, we don't see the exhaustion, we don't see the work behind it. And they obviously would have, endeavored, they would have come through so many blocks, roadblocks, and they are who they are because obviously things that they've pushed, because it's not easy for women of color to just come, through spades of, to come to the point where you actually have a title or a name. It's always
Mhm.
harder for us to put our hand up. So that in and of itself kind of gave me the confidence to stand up and do what I had to do.
Yeah. That's incredible. Now, one thing that
Thanks.
I've just thought about is you talk about this being a massive, massive opportunity and experience for you, given the fact that the people both in the audience and the other people speaking. Have you ever thought about it from the point of view as there may be someone in the audience there who very similar background to you, but might not have maybe the confidence or the just maybe the eagerness to
Yeah.
go about things.
Yeah.
You could directly impact that. I understand you're emceeing it, you're running it, but you know, someone did give you a compliment on your voice, and I think it's completely natural for people to see someone similar to them and give them the sort of confidence to sort of say, I can do this, and then they completely take a 180 and they take off in their own direction and they create their own path. Is that something that sort of sits with you when you're doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Because ultimately, if I find when I think of myself per se, excuse me, um, I think of me, nerves, all of that kind of stuff, which is real, which is very evident as well, internally. You try to convey it as if you're confident and you try not to show it, but that's the truth of it. You do feel the butterflies in your stomach. But if you know that you've impacted even one person in a positive way, and that goes on a dominoes effect into a positive trajectory, then that in and of itself gives me that satisfaction. Because that's what I'm there for, to show that we can and we will, so to show that I'm here, this is what I'm doing. And if you want to do the same thing, here you go, I'm doing it. It's not that hard. So that's always the underlay to any of the the platforms that I take, whether, like I said, news writing or anything of that sort. I've had people who've messaged me going, hey, Shaz, that's awesome. Wow, you went up there and you did that. I wish I could do that. And I literally respond saying, you can. It'll be nervous, it'll be nerve-wracking, you'll be, you might make mistakes, and I have. And just to sort of digress a bit in terms of that, when I was, when that lady back in Manila, when I was 18, she obviously discovered me and I got that stint. I worked for another radio station, a sister radio station, and there was one stint that we had to essentially, I think we were assigned different bars and we had to basically go live every so often. And these bars were in remote locations in Manila, so we had to literally act up on it, showing that, oh, we're so excited, it's a packed bar, when I had 3 people in mind. So, again, 18-year-old trying hard. So
Yeah.
I thought at that time when I went live, and keep in mind, technology wasn't at its, best at the time, I lost the actual connection. So they could hear me, I couldn't. So I was just told, I was just coaxed to keep on acting like I'm having, great fun. So I thought I did a great job. And we had a break, and I met another doc, an experienced doc who's also a DJ. Oh, the guy's known really well, has a massive name in Manila. He came up to me and he essentially looked at me and he said, Shaz, you sounded like an effing funeral. I don't know what funerals sound like. That didn't sound too good. For an 18-year-old who's just emerging, that was crushing, it was gut-wrenching. And keep in mind, I still had another segment to go to. At that moment, I thought I could stay here and wallow in what he said, or I could just push through and just be better. Because ultimately, perhaps he didn't convey it in the best way, the most effective way, but at least, okay, that's what he's saying. He's experienced. It's hard because, it's at that moment your emotions play and you can't help that. So I went through the second part and I just screamed through the top of my lungs as if I'm having this amazing time. So apparently the second time was much better, but that always stayed with me. And that always stayed with me because I put myself going, okay, someone's not doing well. Is that how I'd like to convey the message?
Yeah,
Is that effective?
that's a great point.
It's great. You are experienced and you have such a responsibility to go and focus. This is not restricted to radio. This is to any avenue that you take.
Absolutely. It's going to be applied to absolutely anything.
Correct. And it always kind of goes, if you want someone to do the best that they can, you need to empower them. If you don't empower them, they will not go, they would actually fall. And that comment stayed with me to make sure that I never do that to someone else, but to ensure I use language that's effective and that actually makes them progress and do better.
Yeah.
So that was just, one example that I thought of, which always stayed with me. But it's one of those things, you try to make the best out of it, but you will make mistakes and then learn from it and see what the mistake was. And the thing about journalism in the sense of broadcast, what I've been told is practice, practice, practice. And like you, I hate the sound of my voice, but I need to listen to it to know my intonations, how I sound, my words, how I convey. I'm still at a very preliminary part of it, so a lot to learn still.
But there is that part, and to be completely honest with you, like I'm nervous before every episode, regardless of how well I know the person or not, because it essentially I'm asking people to, in a lot of cases, be very open emotionally, and talk about stuff that a lot of the times people don't necessarily tap into that for whatever reason. And so to be brutally honest with you, I do kind of get terrified before I do an episode, which is why I like to sort of have like a bit of a chit chat to calm myself down, because I'm terrified of ruining their story. And it's, as I said, much like you, I love to talk, but it's very different between amongst friends, and then you're putting yourself on camera, which is out there for anyone to say constructively or unconstructively what they think. And I don't think that really affects me more than it affects me to sort of what I'm going through in terms of I really don't want to mess this story up, because
Yeah.
it's a real fine line between um, saying something that you didn't mean necessarily, and then all of a sudden it's there and anyone
Mhm.
can see it, and then you have to sort of not live with that, but it's you're taking a chance, essentially putting yourself out there. So
Yeah, for sure.
and before I forget, the what you said about the teaching moments, like I could not agree with that anymore. Like I think about this in a workplace kind of environment, and there is such a difference between a good boss and a bad boss. And I don't think experience in terms of the job, like you could have been in that
Yeah,
job for 5 years, I could have been in that job for 18 months, and I could have been 10 times the boss that person is. And
100%.
it is all about the way you communicate. And you have to factor in that not everyone retains information the same as you. Not
Hmm.
everyone learns the same as you.
Correct.
Um, and you know what? It's just not everything that works for you is going to work for other people. And
Absolutely.
I think if
Absolutely.
you think back to like high school, you can think about the good teachers, and you can think about the ones where you're like, you kind of owe me a few dollars for the therapy you've caused me. So
It's
yeah,
true. It's true.
yeah, no, it is, and I think that's why teachers are so important, and that's in a sporting sense, educational sense, work sense. It honestly, like, you have to, and you sort of touched on where you said if I can affect one person,
Hmm.
um, and you can take a very narrow-minded look at that and go, okay, that's one person you've affected, but then that person goes on to affect another person, and
Yep.
then that goes on, and you essentially start a cycle,
Hmm.
and those people are exposed to a completely different way of thinking, and they have a completely different trajectory,
Hmm.
all because of that moment where you were zoned in, and you were like, I've made a difference here.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
yeah, no, so I think that's a really good way to segue into the journalism work. And
Mhm.
um, I think first off, I probably want to know how you manage. I think a lot of people would be interested to know, sort of, you touched on the fact that if you're passionate about it, you'll make the time.
Mhm.
But I think so many people would love to go back to school, but they sort of are like, they're hesitant for whatever reason. So maybe touch on the good experiences and how you've managed to make it work.
Yeah, sure. Look, the reality of it is, you won't always have the good experiences because, that's just how it is when you've got other stuff happening. It's what you do when that happens. So being positive is a massive thing. And I know it's easy for me to say that, but if you're in a pickle, you've got something due, then let's say you've got one child who's unwell, and you're kind of like, what do I do? My way of approaching things is just to be very truthful with myself, primarily, just to say, realistically, this is when I'm going to get this done. And doing things early on. Firstly, find out whatever study it is, why do you want to do it? How important is it? And how realistically can you commit to those times? I have to say, my supervisors, my lecturers have been amazing during the whole thing. They're so supportive. In a uni environment compared to even high school, again, it could be because I was much younger. I can remember much. I drove my guidance counselor crazy. That was equivalent in American schools. But they're so accommodating. And if I say, look, I've luckily thus far never had to ask for an extension. in any of my assignments. I'm third year going full-time uni now, but I started off with part-time uni. And it's just really having a great support system. Like, my partner is extremely supportive in that way. If I tell him, for example, I've got this assignment due, he'll maybe take care of the kids or put them down to sleep. So then I have that, good chunk of 4 or 5 hours and things like that. When uni was up and running, pre-pandemic, the library is excellent. I mean, I lived there. I lived at the library and the cafes below. It's literally caffeine, library, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. And I'm a naturally, extroverted person. So you can imagine with, after 2 cups of coffee,
Yeah.
I go a bit
Can you
whoopee.
please be quiet in the library? Sorry.
I've done that. I did a massive high and I was like, oh, too social. And the detriment about being too social is also trying to study and having, people passing, them. So I had to find my little cocoon in the corner just to make sure I don't see people I know. Double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's
But
dangerous.
it's things, it's things like that, finding a support structure and being aware of what you have to do. So just basically knowing what your classes are, much earlier, and even doing things early. If you've got something due, in 2 weeks time, start off slowly. I'm saying that, but I've not done it. I've done the all-nighter going, and that in of itself has an adrenaline rush. So something's due tomorrow, and I'm like, it's 1 a.m. All right, let's kickstart this. Thing about writing in journalism is that you will continually edit your stuff. Like, you write
Yeah.
something a week ago, and you're like, nah, don't like it, and it's such a norm for people to do that. And then you send it to, your editor. One of the classes I took was this particular writing for the uni newspaper, and your editor will just go, edit, and then sometimes takes away that one paragraph that you spent an hour just to concoct, going, oh no, that's unnecessary. And I was like, that was my baby, but
Like
hey,
that really popped in my head.
it's
Thanks,
happened. And
Caroline.
it's literally deep breath time. You're like, okay,
Yeah.
you know what, that doesn't work. The editor said sorry, so you'll go from there. It's a lot of, I suppose, positive reinforcements, and mainly taking time for yourself as well. And writer's block is real. If you're spending an hour and you can't get 2 words in, I close the laptop, go away, do something else. And even if it's early the next morning, I am better at, completing maybe 300 words in an hour as opposed to not being able to. So just really being honest with yourself and realistic is the best way to go. It is a commitment. It is a long-term commitment because, uni. But if you're really passionate about it, find a support system and go for it. Because I always believe we can say something, we can stay on the sidelines and look at something, or we can actually go there and go, okay, I know this is for me, or I actually know it's not for me. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, that's a really really interesting thing you mentioned there with the writer's block. Is there anything that you have done where you're like, okay, slam the laptop, whether you go for a walk or maybe sit down and watch Netflix for like half an hour and just completely shut your brain off, and then you can sort of, you found that you're like, oh shit, like I'm back. I've got my words back.
Yeah, 100% happens every time.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, and with me, I can't lose time. So for me, half an hour is half an hour away from the kids, or, someone not killing each other, or, something along the lines of that, or, pots and pans banging. It's real. The struggle is real. But it's one of those things that you kind of use I have to use my time wisely. I mean, I go back to the times before kids, and I honestly can tell you, I've probably wasted a lot of time just flopping on the couch, and just going out, just after work for hours. Whereas now it's like, I'm home from work. Okay, it's 6 dinner time, so you're pretty much on an adrenaline continuum, I should say. But that kind of, by being so on the move, it kind of helps you to compartmentalize what you need to do and do it at the time that you need to as well. So with going back to the writer's block, there is a mental exhaustion, and it does happen. It's real. Sometimes it happens even after a very relaxed day, because your mind's so relaxed that you can't get into it. At the moment, I'm doing an internship, even though uni is closed. It's my first paid internship, which is great. So it's where I interview lecturers at the university and then write about their research. Some of their research can be very interesting, or things you've never heard of, or things that you naturally wouldn't, let's say, find exciting, but you've got to write, basically convey their research into lay terms. So I found that being challenging sometimes. It's great in a way as well, because it challenges me to sort of understand what the research is and conveyed in lay terms. There have been times, even yesterday, which is why I had to delay our meeting, where it just couldn't come through. I just couldn't get words in. And today was a great day because I was able to just, type it all out. And it's pretty much 95% ready. So hopefully it won't be another late night because I've got work tomorrow. So yes,
Perfect.
that would kind of help.
Yeah, the mental exhaustion is something that I do have a small bit of experience in. Um, I've mentioned this before in previous episodes, but when I was living in Canada, I did some ice hockey scouting work, and a lot of that was 500 to 600 word reports on players and their tendencies and all that stuff. And I remember getting towards the draft, which was the end of my job. I knew I wasn't staying in it, but I wanted to complete the job for that season, so I could say you didn't quit, whatever. And I knew that, and I didn't want to have like crap work put out there. I remember I had to just pump out so many of these different reports on these kids, and I remember sending it off. I remember sending it out to certain teams to, sort of go, hey, give me a job. Here's my work. I remember sending it off knowing I didn't have to write another one. And I think I just like fell back onto the couch and just said like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Thank God for that. Like, and I'm not going to take that personal shot that about wasting time before kids laying on the couch, like I pretty much just do. But
Sometimes you need to.
it's honestly, the mental exhaustion was crazy, because I
Yeah.
was just like, I couldn't believe like, how much like I was like, I had no time and I just had to put all this stuff out. And when it was done, I was like, oh, I don't know if that's good or bad, probably bad, but I'm done with it. And
Yeah.
I'm going to lay on the couch now for the next 5 years of my life and not do anything.
That's one way of looking at it for sure.
One thing I would love to get your mindset on is how you approach the articles. Now, the article which is how I read, which is the two doctors, one in Sri Lanka, I believe, and one here, and their different perspectives on COVID,
Yep.
and that was really fascinating to me. But I think the more fascinating thing to me is how you personally approach the articles that you write, and maybe if there has been a moment which is sort of like taking you back like a little bit, you're like sort of like, this is really powerful, or this is really, whatever the thought may be.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes, that article that you wrote, it was, I think, part of our Life in a Pandemic segment, I think. And I basically pitched the idea to my editors. So the good thing when you write is, particularly in whether it's magazine or television, you've always got your editor. So it's kind of like it's your story, you write it, but it almost becomes a combination because it's another pair of eyes. Ideally, someone who's been a bit more experienced to kind of, collaboratively sort of say, okay, this is how it should look. Because one thing about writing, particularly when it's something sensitive, or, if we're people, we're human, we have, certain points of view, and our personal point of views are not conveyed, and we're always balanced. And that's always the underlay of journalism and reporting. It's always a balanced writing. Even if you're writing a story about a murderer, you've also got to write the alternate of, okay, who was he as a person, or, why did he do that? Not just, yes, it's blatant of, what crime he committed, but also to sort of give that balanced view. So that's one thing that you kind of learn very fast, and that is one thing that they hone in on to make sure you learn that from the get-go. With the one with the doctors wasn't too hard. It was just basically me asking them questions and them just sort of saying, how the two doctors have experienced the pandemic, and what their how has it affected them personally, their family, their work, and things like that. So it wasn't too hard. It was just trying to again make their responses tighter by editing it and making sure that their message is conveyed without obviously removing that. The one that was a little bit more challenging would have been, I wrote another one about an accent, if you're sort of, if you're judged for having an accent. And I interviewed two people, one of which was someone working in a contact center, and he's Nigerian, and he's originally from there. He's been here for a long time, but he does have a thick Nigerian accent, and he cops it daily. He pretty much cops it. He's extremely knowledgeable. He is able to speak to customers, but the makeup of people is to look at things from the face value. Not many actually look at the person or the voice, or remember, particularly when you're talking to someone on the phone, it's a person at the other end, it's not a robot. So it doesn't really give you the right to, be so condescending. And it also kind of makes you think, are they going to actually help you in the way that you want them to if you're going to start off in that respect? So it was an interesting interview, and it was quite powerful, in the sense of how he overcomes it. Particularly, it's something he encounters every day. Can you just imagine that someone constantly telling you, that you don't want to speak to someone else because they don't understand you, or, they have a concern about their energy bill, but then it comes back to, oh, well, I don't like how you sound. I don't understand you. I don't want to speak to you. So it's just things like that keeps going. And the other person I interviewed was someone who worked in HR, also someone who is not local originally. She speaks, well, just that she doesn't have an Australian accent. Her perspective is different, which was interesting. Hers was more about if you're confident in how you speak and if you are clear, regardless of your accent, you can convey the message. And she doesn't cop things like that. Again, it could be because she doesn't face customers. She is in HR. She deals mostly with stakeholders, internal and external. So it was a balanced sort of write-up, but it was interesting to make sure that I don't sort of swing one way, but obviously also convey the message in the writing.
Was that hard in that aspect because of the fact that you, like me, would have seen firsthand dealing with Origin, you do get the worst of the worst. And I saw those moments where, people would say, I want to speak to someone else. And you would, I would say, or someone else would say, oh, don't let it get to you. But I never really thought about how difficult that might be because that never happened to me. Was that hard for you to write an article like that when you've seen firsthand just how bad people can be in those situations?
Oh, for sure. It was, because it took me back to, like I said, I went to an American school. So when I first started, I had more of a stronger American accent. And, I was called a Yank and things like that on the phone. Because I think I started off with speaking to residential customers. Again, it's one of those things where, the company in and of itself, provides really great services per se.
Yeah.
But the customers are irate. That's why they're calling. They're not happy about something or the other. So I, again, tried to put my energy on that. Okay, they're upset. They're calling about something. It works most of the time. There are some times where customers are just unreasonable. There's nothing. I had one example when I was a team leader at one point, and where, the consultant came up to me almost, tears welled up saying, oh, this customer doesn't want to speak to me because I'm a female. I said, okay. So I took the call. All he said was, I want to speak to, oh, why am I speaking to you? I want to speak to a manager. I said, I am the previous person's manager. Oh, I want to speak to your manager. I said, okay. Put the call through, which is a rarity, but put the call through, and my manager was female and her manager was female. So you can just imagine how the conversation went.
We can play this all day.
Yeah, we can go exactly Russian roulette. And he hung up, ultimately. So you get those, and sometimes, this is what I meant by you go back to the person and they're probably having a bad day, or particularly this year, we took a lot of conversations with a grain of salt, because while they come across so negatively and even, you know, in an ugly way where they're trying to project that negativity and using someone's accent, it's really reflecting upon themselves that, you know, where they are perhaps in that space. So the only thing you can do is just be, you know, as professional as you can. And if they go beyond, just basically give them a warning and just terminate that. So when I wrote the story, all that, you know, came flooding back, you know, in terms of what it is, but keeping true to the person that I interviewed and conveying those parts, which is the truth of it, where he does cop it every day and this is how he handles it. It's not too hard when you're staying true to what your interviewee says, just as long as you also project it in that same way. You don't underrepresent or overrepresent them. So that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you're a much better person than me. I'm not sure if I had been exposed to those experiences. I don't think I would have been that impartial, but that's another reason to prove why I never would have made it in the journalism industry. I guess the last thing
That's it.
That's it. I guess we'll finish off on sort of maybe where you want to take it. That can be in terms of the type of work you want to produce, or, you know, as it can be as take this question wherever you want to take it.
Sure. It's a big question, you know, because we don't know what's happening tomorrow. I mean, this year in and of itself is like, what? So, but the idea, like I said, is always centered around community for me. For me, that's my natural high. If I can convey, if I can stand up, if I can represent the minority, that's my big win. Whether it's through, you know, my writing, or whether it's through broadcast journalism, which would be my ideal, that's the ultimate goal for me. So in this, you know, age of technology, I mean, a lot of them are, you know, online, social media is massive, and I suppose a dream would be for me to have my own little show, my talk show. I'm a massive fan of Oprah, but, you know, that's reaching right up to the clouds. But in that kind of way, to actually have, you know, interestingly, like I told you, it's what you're doing. It's essentially what you're doing. You know, like bringing people in who don't usually get the platform, and, you know, have them recognize, have them tell their story, or, you know, to the point where we don't point at an anchor or a presenter and say, oh, that is a Black lady, or that is an Aboriginal person, rather than saying, oh, that's a TV presenter. We need to get there.
The content.
It's always about the content. And, you know, if I can help in any way of getting there, or being another face for the minority to normalize what people see, you know, then that's great. That's ultimately what I'd like to do. But at the moment, it's just really taking anything that I can. And the reality of it is, you know, the industry is, as you know, is all over the place at the moment. So really taking any chance, any experience is some experience. So just really being grateful for what I have at the moment, which is my internship, and paid internship, which is great. You know, getting my name out there. That's ultimately where I'm at the moment. And yeah, we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, that's an incredible way to look at it, and I think a lot of people should take that approach in the way they go about their business. I just want to thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and for being so open and honest about, you know, about why you go about your business the way you do, why you do journalism, and why you're so community focused and driven, and also touching on a bit of your personal background and your personal history. I really do appreciate it, and I will be reading your work, and I hope to see you have your own talk show, and I hope to come on one day.
No, that'll be awesome. Thank you so much for the support and also the opportunity, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
No, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you very much, and have a good one.
You too. Cheers.
Bye.